Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
I'm Eliot.
And we have some cool stats to report, actually.
We do.
So over the weekend, I noticed that, or actually not over the weekend. So on the last day of December, I noticed that we were a mere few downloads away from 2,500 downloads for just December, which was a big milestone for us, by far our best month. And by the end of the day, we had hit it. So woohoo for December.
Yeah. And so while you were pointing that out, I wanted to find out where the downloads came from.
Yeah. And this is the more important thing that we need to rectify this ASAP.
We do. So
January goals.
So you can click on the United States. You can click on the Libsyn site, which distributes the podcast, and we can see where all the downloads came from. And that's why we keep joking around how we have a huge following in Sweden. But if you click on the United States, it'll break it down by state. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that, and there is just one big gray hole. One state that is grayed out, meaning that we don't even have one single download. And that state is Arkansas.
So here's the deal. If you know someone in Arkansas who likes podcasts, or you know what, they don't even have to like podcasts.
Or if you're traveling in Arkansas.
Yeah. Oh, travel. Would that work?
I guess so. Yeah.
If you're traveling through Arkansas, that's a lot of coordination. Download the podcast while. Plus, that sort of feels like cheating.
We're begging for somebody who doesn't even like podcasts to sit in their home in Little Rock and download a podcast.
Yeah, but that's coercion versus cheating. I'm fine with coercion. It's I want it to be honest. That's all.
Forced, compelled, yet honest.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking for our first Arkansas listener. If you could help out by spreading the word, I'd appreciate it. So
definitely.
It just bugs me that there's that one hole in the state.
It's not even like it's Rhode Island or something. It's really noticeable. It's in the middle of the country, and it's Are you
insinuating that Rhode Island doesn't matter?
I'm insinuating that Rhode Island would not be noticeable in this.
Oh, you just wouldn't notice. Have you zoomed in and checked Rhode Island?
On my phone, the map of the continental United States, it's no, Rhode Island would not be. Gotcha. I would think that it was just a speck on my screen protector.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I will say that when we were looking into that, we noticed that California, big shout out to California, they are our biggest listener state, even more. So we're in Maryland. So that is significant that another state besides our own is significantly our top runner state.
It is.
Woohoo.
It is. And I'm curious whether that had anything to do with California having legalized recreational marijuana. Yeah.
Okay.
Just
all right. So on that note, you want to thank our sponsors?
I do. Thank you to Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to start in with my story.
Okay, then I don't even have to ask if you have a story.
Oh, no, I have a story.
Okay.
And I'm going to do it.
Start in with your story.
Here we go.
Okay.
So here's my story. The story actually was prompted by something this last weekend, but it reminded me of a story from way back. So I'm going to tell that part of the story first. So back in like 2003, 2004-ish, when I was first doing I was still COO of the architecture firm. Mm-hmm. I was doing my facilitation training at Hopkins and then also doing coaches training, which I discovered through the facilitation work. And as part of that coaching training, I had to have a coach. And it was part of our certification process. And so I was working with this woman named Randy Flagg, who was just wonderful. And there were a couple of things she said to me over the years that were really, for the year or two that I worked with her, that were really pivotal for me, like really, really big things. But one of them that has stuck with me the most, and that I have referenced for myself and for others over and over and over again, was there was an issue that I kept coming back around to. And I think I used the word stuck. I said, I just feel really stuck. I can't decide. I'm really stuck on this, whatever. And she said, do you know what I think stuck is? And I said, what? And she goes, maybe not always, but I think a lot of times stuck is when you know what you want, but you're just not ready to admit it yet.
Okay.
And that was kind of my response. I was like, okay. And actually inside I was kind of like, oh my God, I think she's right. Damn it. But I was reminded of that again this weekend when I was reading something. There was a short little passage, and I just want to read it very quickly because I think it expands on the idea. And I think it's super important because in the work I'm doing now, so much of the on-call decision support, kind of helping entrepreneurs navigate what's right in front of them in the moment, comes back to kind of spinning your wheels energy a lot of times. And something that I think anytime something becomes a buzzword like analysis paralysis, it somehow takes the sting out of the responsibility of it, because then you can just claim it, like perfectionist, like, well, I'm a perfectionist, so blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm an overthinker. And there's something kind of like about putting a name on something that I think then kind of takes you out of the responsibility of being like, okay, but maybe that's not a good thing to be. I should really take a look at that. But so anyway, this said, overanalysis is a form of denial. To overanalyze means that you have the correct answer, but refuse to accept it. Then you go on searching for an answer that you prefer rather than accept the truth. Remember that the truth for one is not necessarily the truth for another, and that the truth has a tendency to drive you crazy just before it sets you free. Perhaps what you once thought was craziness is simply what it takes to free yourself from outdated beliefs. And I wanted to use that today because I think overthinking, like perfectionism, is something that comes with this like weird sense of pride, or that it can. And I think a lot of times that's pretty backwards, and it creates a lot of wheel spinning and slogging. And maybe I'm just projecting because maybe that's what I do. Get slogged down into. That's definitely my slog point, is over analyzing. So anyway, I just want to kind of open up that conversation.
Well, I think buried in what you had just read are a couple loaded concepts. One is the correct answer.
Yes.
And correct. See, I often find for myself and for clients that with whom I speak about this, that correct takes on two different dimensions, because one is correct in your gut, that whether it's emotional, this is what I prefer, or this is what I feel is right, or just your first instinct is to go this way. And then there's the other correct that is logic, or the way we've always done it, or I know I'm not going to get called out if I follow this procedure because everybody does it this way.
Oh, I'd add like a third kind of correct to that, though.
What's the third kind of correct?
This is the one this is my version of slog, is like a fear of regret. Because I guess it's not unlike the second one you mentioned, except the way you framed it was what about other people would think. And me, it's more like my own kind of like, oh, well, I regret this later kind of.
But even so,
slog.
that's the overthinking part, which, by
the way, I know nothing about overthinking.
No, I know. You're always gut reaction, go with your gut and don't look back. If I know one thing about you, it's that. But I think that's where the paralysis occurs. I really want to do it this way. My gut reaction is to do it this way, but that's not the other forms of correct answer.
So that's interesting. So, is that to insinuate, or, how much is it important that there's like a gut reaction that you're then not mistrusting, but is it just simply a lack of trust in your gut reaction, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I think first and foremost, it's a lack of trust. I think that there's, and I have to say, I come from a profession where if you want to ask for guidance about what to do in 2018, my profession will hit the books and look back at what's been done in 1988. So we're very rear view. Precedent. We're very rear view mirror oriented.
Sure.
But what I see again and again, even from very talented entrepreneurs, they may go out and they may start their company and take on the world and be, what's the cliche, a disruptor of this industry, and do a lot of things differently. But a lot of times in operations, or when it comes down to the decisions of running a company daily, they don't trust their gut as much. And so they'll go back to, well, what are their older mentors telling them, and what logically what has been done before.
Well, there's something, because I will say indecision has been one of my greatest Achilles heels. I very rarely suffer from second guessing. Like once I decide, I don't really go back on second guessing too much. But I have found that people tend to fall into one category or the other. They're quick, they're very decisive, but then sometimes their slog point is second guessing, or they're indecisive, and then once they decide, they're fine. So I'm tend to be on that. I got to give a shout out to my sister, Brittany, many years ago, actually said something that has really, really helped me on that. Is we were shopping for a present, I think for my mom, maybe. I'm not even sure who it was for. It was for someone, and I had narrowed it down to these two things, and I was just obsessively like, I don't know, but this one's so great, and I don't know, but this one's also so great. And like, oh, I don't know. I was going back and forth, and she said two things that were really important. She said, one, don't forget they're only going to see one of them. So they won't be able to compare whether that one was like 0.004% better than or worse than this other one. So they're only going to see one of them. And she said, and the way I look at it, if you're having that much trouble deciding, it probably doesn't make a difference. They're probably close enough that it doesn't matter. And that part of it, if I'm trying this hard to discern which one's like the horse that's going to cross the line in front of the other one, it probably doesn't matter. They're probably both good enough, and there's nothing. So I'm just simply wasting time. And that awareness has been really helpful. Doesn't keep me from not overanalyzing some things, but because there are other traps I fell into, but that one's been a pretty pivotal one for me.
Right. But does that propel you into that second camp, which is, okay, you're ready to make that decision, but now you're going to go to bed and you're going to second guess it before your head hits the pillow? No, I think I'm not really a second guesser. I'm more future oriented than I am past. The past doesn't bog me down as much as like I'm trying to maximize the future. That's where I get stuck. How about you? I mean, are you more of indecisive or second guesser? No,
or neither. Are you just perfect? And
well, as I'm sure my wife will tell you if asked, I'm flawless in virtually every respect. No, I'll make decisions pretty quickly, but I will on my drive home, and I have 35 minutes in the car. I will go through a catalog of the various forms of idiocy I practiced during that day or that week or whatever. And that's why I got satellite radio.
But if I could rewire my brain, like, if I got to pick, I think that is the better one, only because indecisiveness then keeps you from taking action. And once you take action, like you will deal with whatever comes up next. Like you just have to, the chess game keeps on moving and you have to navigate it. And so you might overthink your past decisions, but at least you're moving forward already. I think the indecision and the slogging and the overanalysis that gets in the way of just deciding is where it can be so much. And so this weekend, actually, my husband and I have decided we were going to carpet 2 of the rooms in our house. And we went yesterday to look at carpet. And, and we were at one place and we found carpet for both rooms that we liked. And I had this really strong urge to like, okay, well, this is the first place we've been, so we really should go look someplace else and see if there's, blah, blah, blah. And I just stopped. And this is the closest thing I'm putting into a New Year's resolution for this year, is to make faster decisions and just, and I was just like, no, I don't want to go. Like there may be I'm making air quotes here for those of you who can't see me. There may be a better carpet out there for us that maybe I might like a tiny bit more, or maybe is at a slightly better price. But these are good enough and I'm going to like them and they're going to be fine. And we're done. And I don't want to put any more energy. That's to me what feels like is at stake in this topic is wasted energy and wasted heart and soul and time that you put into things that could be going into something more meaningful.
Well, and I learned the reason that
and I love the way I used you in that sentence as if I was talking to anyone besides me.
we, the keynote, we.
Moi.
But I realized, and I started to make decisions faster. I guess my epiphany was that the other people, the people that I'm worried about, who will second guess, or I can't do that. I better overanalyze. I better make it perfect. Well, they think I'm foolish or something like that, that they don't know either. I mean, that it's a question of attitude. And so I'll tell you, and I might have told you this story before, but when I was new in the profession, I had to go into court representing one of my father's clients, and my father didn't like court, so I had to go in and take care of this. And court, as our listeners may know, even from a speeding ticket, can be an intimidating place. But here, you're sitting next to your client, and your client is paying you money, and then there's a lawyer on the other side who's paid a lot of money to make you look like an idiot, and then the judge up high on the bench and the flags and glaring down. Anyway, so I finished my argument, and a litigator's nightmare, by the way, is when a judge says, well, counsel, that's all fine, but what about Green versus Brown? And then you don't know what Green versus Brown is, and you just want
And he doesn't want to just debate colors, right?
Yes, yeah, you just some precedent somewhere. So that's your nightmare. So anyway,
I'm more of a blue.
I finished up my argument, and the judge said, well, counsel, why isn't this a novation? And I remember I had heard that word in law school, and I had no idea what novation was. And I just wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. And I said the only thing I could think of, which is I looked up at him and I said, a novation? Why would it be a novation?
Nice.
Because I was hoping that he would explain in his answer, and I could do something with it. And he looked up at me, or he looked down at me, he looked up from his papers, he looked down at me, and he goes, yeah, you're probably right. It's not a novation. And I was like, he doesn't know. He thinks he knows, but he's not sure. And he was worried about being made to look like a fool. So it was that moment that I thought, if I make a decision and I have the attitude generally just to carry it off, that this is the way we're going to do it. I'm not going to dip a toe in the water. I'm just going to jump in. This is the way we're going to do it. It's worked for me.
Well, no, so it's so interesting to me because I think one of my favorite things is when I realize that I have two closely held belief constructs that are actually completely opposite to one another. So I really, truly don't buy into right answers. Again, air quotes. This is a very air quotey episode.
It is.
Right answers, correct answers, especially as an entrepreneur. I mean, if you run a franchise, then there is an exacting way to do things. There's a book that says take tab B, stick in slot A. I guess those are right, wrong answers because it's been mapped out for you. But if you are running a business, by definition, you are almost always this the front goose, the thing that is parting waters that have not yet been parted. You're going where no man has gone before.
The front goose.
The front goose.
I sense a title.
I don't know. Yeah, it could be the front goose. The goosiest? I don't know. But there is no path. That's the whole. I think it's something that, from a business standpoint, I think can be overlooked or sort of forgotten, is that that impacts the viability of even the concept of right answers, because you're forging a new path. And so in those contexts, I can keep a really clean, agile stance around it of let's just take action. And then if we're not quite right, we'll course correct as we go. I think we've talked before about the whole space shuttle course correcting thing. It's it's never on track. It's always course correcting. You just constantly pay attention to the data and go. I think where I get sloggy is where it feels like there are more things you can't undo, or toothpaste you can't put back in a tube if you make that decision. So I think we probably should make the distinction between course correcting kinds of things and things if your business decision is, do I close that whole department or something? You can't just be that wasn't quite right. Let's reopen it back up. Hire all those people back. Right. So I think there are levels of, because I don't want to be cavalier about decision making.
No, but with personnel, it's not just closing, the Wichita branch. It's with personnel. I think there's also an issue so when I started a law firm with some other lawyers back in the mid 90s, I think it was, and we were all fairly new in the profession. We decided we were going to do it differently. We came from hierarchical firms with all of these rules. And so we decided, and we had a partners meeting on this, we decided that we were going to adopt, I think it was the Outback motto of no rules, just right. Okay. So we weren't going to have all these rules. We were going to run. It's kind of like new parents going, our kid's not going to have a bedtime. So we decided to do this. And then as we got deeper into the practice and the demands of clients and deadlines and trials and all that we realized that no, we had to backtrack on that. There were some very specific rules that we had to enact. And the difficulty was, and these are adults, obviously, they're not children, but still, even with adults, once you establish a certain pattern of conduct, to go back and say, you know what, we're not going to be as lax as we once were. Yeah. That's a hard thing. It's not toothpaste back in the tube.
Taking away freedoms and like rolling things back. Yeah, no, it could be tricky. But so I think there's a couple things in there. I want to come back to that concept in a second. I think that what's starting to percolate a little bit for me is it comes back to why having a good team of the right kind of people is so important, because I believe that a lot of times when we overanalyze, when we overthink, when we slog, it's because it's asking us to use a part of our brain that's not our best part of our brain, like personally. So I can give you two personal examples. The reason we have the illustrious Kristi Schmier do show notes is that if I were to try and do show notes.
Oh, I've seen this.
You've seen me write things. You've seen me try and write things. And I can blame the dyslexia and the learning challenges on, only so far, but it takes me a while to construct a thought, unless it's just pouring at me. Like if I'm writing a quick Facebook post or something, like I can write very quickly. But if I'm trying to convey a thought and I want to make sure it's understood and I want to make sure the nuances aren't misunderstood, which I would want to in show notes, I would turn that into like a multiple day project. And I know Kristi knocks it out in like pretty much while she's listening to the podcast. So that is something like I don't allow myself to slog on that, because I know that is calling forth a part of my brain that does not have its best neurons. So I pass it off to someone else. The other place for me is scheduling. I know that one of my superpowery good things about my brain is that I'm a maximizer. Like I can maximize the benefit of things, like, and process it all at once. Where that is not helpful is when it comes to scheduling. Like you need to be a more decisive person to do scheduling, because I'll be like, oh, that thing's in Hunt Valley. Well, before I schedule that, I should see if I could also schedule this other thing that's up there, so that while I'm up there, I can do those things. And I'm trying to like do all these things at once. Meanwhile, that just turns it into a huge snarl and it's complicated. And so that's why I have Karen, my scheduling wizard. She does all my scheduling, because I know that brings me down. So I think there's something to noticing where you are, whereas other things I am very decisive. So I keep those things. And so I just wanted to sort of throw in there that sometimes overanalysis is when it shouldn't be. It's a great sign for delegation.
Well, and with what you said, what struck me throughout both of those examples, your scheduling and your writing show notes, is the power of insight, of knowing what you're like, where your weak points are. So you started this talking about, do you overthink? Do you do gut reactions and, ask questions later? And then you drill down into specific examples. And I think that's so incredibly important, and probably even fodder for another conversation, which is understanding not only your proclivities, but also your highest and best use. So you know that about yourself. And by the way, it's fascinating to me, because I've seen you do both of these things. I've seen you try and write like an intro to the podcast or show notes. And it's like that scene in Meet the Parents with the airline attendant. You're typing and typing and typing. And I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, is this chapter 2? I thought we were just doing this.
And then I turn my screen around and there's three sentences.
Like 3 sentences in there. So I've seen you do that.
It's terrible. It's painful.
But your Facebook posts are amazing. I mean, and I know you reread them, but it doesn't take you that long, because I think for that audience, for what you want to say, and that source from within you of your message on Facebook, that's just more natural.
Those just come out for me. Yeah, I don't have to think about them.
And I think that's really cool. But you have the insight to know that because of the way your brain works, you, and I'll say we, need a Kristi.
Yes.
Right? We desperately need a Kristi. And I think that's the key, because it's okay if you overthink things. It's okay if you're a gut reaction person. But either way, I think you need, for that particular discipline, the Kristi of that facet.
You need like the person who's on the other side of the seesaw of you to balance out what, the parts that you're not great at.
Right. And the thing that I think is missing from so many businesses and so many entrepreneurs that I talk to is they don't have that one person that can look at them across the table and say, seriously? That's what they need. If you don't have that person that can go, seriously?
Really? That's what we're doing right now?
That's what we're doing right now. Then you need to widen your circle.
Yes. No, absolutely. And so I think that, I would love to hear from some of our listeners about like where you get slogged down into overthinking. This topic comes up so often. And I think it's in part because, you were talking about like being insightful about yourself, but I think sometimes the overthinking can be about real blind spots. And that's why I loved this quote that I read this weekend, this just awareness that what if, because I feel like it lifts up a rock and shows a potential blind spot, is what if when you are overthinking something, because I think we all can feel that we're overthinking something. We just don't know how to get out of it. There's like there's like a gravitational black hole pull to it. You're like, oh, I'm doing that thing, but I'm stuck. I think it's just a great checkpoint is, am I overthinking this, or do I actually know what my answer is? And I'm just desperately hoping that I can find another one.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Kristi Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jodi Hume.
And I'm Eliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.